Hello, everybody. My name is Megan. I'm one of the directors here at the Reynolds-Jonkhoff Funeral Home. And on behalf of Scott's family, thank you all so much for driving in these conditions to come and show love and support and share some amazing memories with the family. In just a few minutes, we're going to begin the service. Officiating today is Pastor Christopher Cox. But before we do that, I'd like you all to take a moment, please, and make sure that your cell phones are either turned off or put on silent. Immediately following the service today, we do have a luncheon available to anybody that would like to join the family, and that's going to be at the Elk Rapids Township Hall. Maps will be made available at the door on your way out today. Thank you all again for being here.
I've stood at a lot of funerals, and I always find it a little odd, some of the things that I have to say, like welcome. But welcome isn't really a salutation of joy. It's simply a word of hospitality. And why it sits a little bit more poignant, I think, today is because one of the many things that I've learned about Scott is that he had a unique, sometimes different approach to hospitality. As Megan said, my name is Pastor Christopher Cox, and I have a unique opportunity here at Reynolds-Jonkhoff to participate in funeral services for people whom I never knew. Now that may seem like a strange thing, then why am I standing up here when everybody in this room knew Scott better than I did? Well, I don't know the answer to that, except they called me and not you. But outside of that, it gives me a wonderful opportunity as a pastor and just as a person to hear about somebody who lived in our community, to hear about somebody who served in our community, who shared himself so freely and so openly with so many people. Well, how would I know that? Look at this room, and the hallways and the stairs and the other rooms in this building, on what has been referred to by any type of Armageddon references we could possibly have outside. You all chose to be here today. But it's more important than that. See, we live in a time of our society where time matters so much. It's so expensive. Time is so valuable to us. Today, more than ever in our history, people don't show up at things. Things that used to matter, they put to the side. Yet here today you sit on a Sunday afternoon. And I imagine you sit here because of the reality that struck this family and our community in this past couple of days when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something unexpected happened. I sat with the family last night for the first time, and I got to know some really wonderful and lovely people who had this great guy in their life for a long time. And they probably thought he was going to be there forever. After all, somebody had to make dinner. Yep. I've sat by families for a long time at the end of someone's life, and I sit so many times trying to decide, would it be better if this would just happen suddenly? Or would it be better if this was something that we knew was coming and we had our chances to say goodbye? But I think in learning a little bit about Scott and his family, if he had his choice, he'd rather prolong that as much as possible. Not because he didn't want you to say goodbye, but rather he didn't want you to be hurt. One of the other big elephants I talk about all the time here is that we're at a funeral or memorial or whatever you want to call it, but this is a time to honor someone's life and to celebrate what they've done, and that means there are going to be moments today where you're going to feel like you want to cry. And there are going to be moments, hopefully, where you feel like you want to laugh. And my encouragement to you is to do that, to express your emotion, because so often, and I've been there, I've sat in a funeral and I try to hold back tears because nobody else is crying yet, and I don't want to be the first. And then I stop listening to what I'm hearing because I'm trying so hard not to cry. So if you feel today like you need to bawl your eyes out, it's okay. As I sat with this family last night for some time, I was struck by the reality of how quickly this happened. I'm not so sure that their reality really understands what has gone on. And so there's going to be a homework assignment for you all today when you leave here. And as a teacher, you can give out gold stars if they do it, but it's very simple. Naomi used this term that we use in grief care a lot called the new normal. See, your lives today are pretty much the way they were yesterday, except for this family. And there's a massive, we're talking Moby Dick size hole in this family. A man who kept everything going. He was spinning all those plates and making sure that everyone was where they needed to be, when they needed to be there, and fed with some really good food, as long as it wasn't Campbell's soup. They haven't yet begun to really understand the size of that impact. And so your assignment is not to say something to them today or tomorrow, but put on your calendar for something down the road in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even 3 months down the road. When you've gone back to life as you know it and they're sitting there trying to figure out what does life look like now. It's not that they won't appreciate hearing from you today, but they've already heard from a lot of you and they're going to hear from a lot more. But imagine what it's going to be like when you pick up the phone in 3 or 4 weeks. Just say, hey, I was thinking about you. I'm a pastor, believe it or not, and I will, from time to time, incorporate a little bit of my faith, because really, my faith is the only thing that gets me through something like this. If you don't have something to cling on to in a time like this, I don't know how you make it. I have a God in my heart who loves me and gave his son to die for me, and that's a God who cares. And sometimes that's all I have on a day like today. And so we're going to invoke him in a way that is kind of really fitting for Scott. Now, I have no idea what is going to be said because I don't speak Spanish, but some of you in the room do. And why this is unique is that if you didn't know, apparently Scott was quite versed in multiple languages, and it was his willingness to learn and study that language to a point that was fluent and easy to use that he was able to reach into people's lives in a very, very unique way that was uniquely him. See, we live in a world today where serving and helping other people is really not the positive, cool thing that it used to be. Hospitality isn't what it used to be. Putting out even a small effort is so hard for us. But here is a man who studied another language so intensely and so deeply that he could use it to make an impact on other people. Now, I don't think he did it for the financial gain. I'm betting there wasn't a financial gain. Learning what I have learned about Scott, I imagine there might have been actually a financial loss somewhere along the way, because his generosity just wasn't in his time, but it wasn't everything about him. And so we're going to hear a prayer today by someone who had a special relationship with him. And you're going to have to tell me if she's saying a prayer at all, because I don't know if you speak Spanish, but she's going to come up and Lorena is going to share God's word through a way that Scott would appreciate and love.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lorena Cruz Barcenas, and Scott and Naomi came in our lives back in 87, 88, if I recall correctly. I was very little. When I first heard Scott speak Spanish as a kid, I'm like, how does he speak Spanish? And he was a great impact in my migrant family growing up. And from then till now, last time I saw him, if I tried speaking English to him, no, it was not English, it was Spanish. And he was always happy to see my mom and dad too, and speak Spanish, not English. So he will be greatly thought of every single time. Oh, and Mexican food, he loved it. Always complimented my mom's cooking. So I'm not a public speaker, but I'm reading this only in Spanish, and I'll try to keep it together. Okay. Hoy me presento ante ti con humildad profunda y segura que mi pedido será escuchado, para implorar por el alma de Scott, y quien has llamado a descansar a tu lado. Elevo a ti oración, oh Señor, porque solo tú eres paz, incluso en medio, incluso de las más fuertes tempestades. Te pido también, Señor, por aquellos que hoy lloran la partida de un ser querido. A ellos abrázalos con tu amor infinito y dales sabiduría para entender lo que está pasando, tranquilidad para mantener la calma en estos momentos difíciles, inteligencia para comprender que la mejor manera de honrar a quien ya ha partido es recordarlo con amor, y valentía para que puedan reponerse de la tristeza y continúen adelante con tu compañía y haciendo tu santa voluntad. Amen. Thank you. And you know where to find me.
I imagine there's one thing that you didn't maybe understand about why he talked about that food so much. See, he understood the full breadth of hospitality, which meant that if you compliment the food, you were often invited back for more of it.
Yes.
I have a process that I kind of go through with families, and it changes a little bit each time when I sit with them. But one of the things I really like to do is I like to ask this two questions, and one I'll tell you later. But the first one is I ask the family if they would just give me some words to describe him. I used to ask for one word, and that never seemed to work very well. So we just ask for words now. But I loved some of the words that were chosen. He was selfless. He was compassionate. He was loving. Apparently, he was a cute little blonde boy at one time. See, if it had been one word, we wouldn't have gotten that. But there were better words that came after that. Words that talked about the character of who he was at his core. See, it's easy to be forgiving and patient and open-minded if you love people. And Scott loved people. Look around you. You're here not because of what you did in Scott's life, but you are here because of what Scott did in your life. As I'm saying these things, I'm thinking I was pretty unlucky. But you had time to be with him, in relationship with him. It's interesting when somebody passes far too soon. And I think that's probably the only thing we can all put our heads around today, is that this day shouldn't be here today. It's far too soon and it's far too early. But it's possible, and I'm no doctor, and I don't think this is any scientific thing, but it's very possible that he just gave all he had. All the time, every time. And he had given it. I can live with that. He was forgiving. Now, my human nature tells me that I shouldn't forgive until I get my way, until somebody convinces me that they are really sorry for wronging me in some way, because that's the nature of sin in my life. But he wasn't like that. He forgave. He just forgave. I imagine it was harder for him not to forgive than to forgive. That's an amazing character trait. I wrote this word down next and kind of just went on to the next one, not thinking much about it. And the word didn't really make a lot of sense to me until I finished spending the time with the family. But he was patient. I sat in a room and I watched, I don't know how many people were there last night. So many different people and personalities and qualities about them. And I imagine this guy sitting in the middle of this chaos of a family and holding it together in a way. Very truly, it sounded as if he was sort of the common factor, the common denominator within the family. But he was patient. Is that a word that you would even pretend to call yourself most of the time? I think I'm patient, and then I sit at the light at Munson and 3 Mile for a while. Or I try to walk down to my office on Front Street during Cherry Festival. But ironically, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm guessing he liked the Cherry Festival. Or at least the people who went to it. See, when we're impatient, it's because we are putting ourselves before people around us all the time. When I'm sitting at an intersection waiting for that light to turn green, I'm wanting to go faster than everyone else. Let's see, for Scott, there's those people that were holding him up that he focused on. And for a guy like that, it's no longer about sitting and waiting at the intersection. It's like, could this light please stay a little bit red, a little bit longer so I could have another conversation with this person? It's a very distorted, un-American, un-2018 way to live, to actually find reasons to extend your time with people so you can get to know them more. You can spend more time with them. But this is how he lived. Now, I heard over and over again the things that he did and how he was involved in the community. And I mean, I'm a pastor and I own 2 businesses, and I hear people say to me all the time, how do you do it all? And I can't even imagine that you saw him much in the last 20 years. He was so busy being around people. He wasn't trying to amass a fortune. He wasn't trying to have the next big idea. He was trying to go out into the community and tell people something that so few of us ever say out loud, which is, you matter. Think about that. Now, I don't imagine that we're going to see a PBS documentary about Scott. I don't think we're going to see much in the newspaper outside of an obituary. But I imagine in the lives of people in this room and the people who are watching online and the people who couldn't be here today, because his reach went so far greater than just our little area of Traverse City. I imagine those people have a perspective a little bit different. In their lives, he was pretty big. In some people's lives, he was monumentally large. And you're going to hear from some of them today. I understand he was inquisitive. I like that word. I don't know who gave it to me. Maybe his uncle or someone yesterday, but I like inquisitive people. You can tell somebody's inquisitive when they come up and talk to you, because someone that is inquisitive asks you about you. Do you want to feel special today? Find somebody that will actually spend the time to ask you about yourself. You want to make somebody feel special today? Take the time to get to know who they are. Spend time, be intentional about it for one day, and you will get to see how a man lived his life. Other people mattered more to him than himself. In the same way, I understand people felt pretty comfortable around him. And the last thing I heard came from his wife. It's not bad, I promise. I changed the language to make it clean. He was totally committed. He was totally committed to his family, to his children. He went to more soccer games, I think, than you guys did. Yeah. He was committed to his reffing. He was committed to everything he did. He was committed to his wife. But then he took on extra commitment. I wonder how many people would raise their hand if I said, if you felt at some point in your life that you became a commitment of Scott's. He was committed to the Mexican food. Not because he wanted to eat it, but because he wanted to eat it with them. See, there's a difference there. He was committed to them. That's not easy to do. If that's not in your nature, it's almost impossible to do. But there's this thing in church and ministry that we use called the 5 love languages. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but it's a wonderful idea of way of looking at how we do things. And now, as an administrator of the test, I am not allowed or supposed to do what I'm about to do. So nobody mention this in case you hear about it later on. But I am not supposed to decide for a person what their love language is. It's not my job. But I imagine his was pretty easy. There's this one little love language at the back of the list. It's called acts of service. You think that might fit for him? I'm a Rotarian, and in Rotary we have this adage that says service above self. And sometimes we have to remind our fellow Rotarians of this adage, especially when we are trying to self above service. But this is how he woke up. Imagine if anything, it was holding him back. Okay, you've talked to 50 new people today, it's enough.
Time to go home. Let's go, Scott. Come on.
It's the reason why many families have 2 cars.
Amen.
The size of his heart had to be pretty immense. People mattered to him. You can't buy that, you can't teach it. And you should think of yourselves as incredibly lucky to have been the recipient of that. It's very rare, and you may never encounter again another person who cared about people as much as he did. Don't be angry if you don't, because you are more fortunate than so many who have never had that. It makes it easy to be a mom, doesn't it? Now, I didn't ask about what happened when the diapers were needed to be changed back then, but I know at some point he decided that full-time dad was a pretty great gig. Think about that. How many men do you know in your world that would give up opportunity and advancement and all the things that he clearly would have done without even thinking about it? To get that big, huge title, dad. But his kids mattered. His kids mattered before his kids mattered, if that makes any sense at all. Before they were waking him up in the middle of the night and needing changed, he had already decided that they mattered enough. But he went a little step further and realized it was never enough. And that's why you would find him showing up everywhere the kids were. Sometimes making better friends than the kids. It's a good reminder of a song we're going to listen to now that the family had picked out. And depending on how you look at yourself as a dad, you might have searched for this differently on YouTube. Some of us would have gone to Phil Collins and looked for You Be in Our Heart. But a dad who wanted to be dad more than anything probably would have looked it up under Tarzan. Listen to these words, because as I was listening to them at whatever hour it was, I was writing this funeral last night. I don't know that the song is big enough to explain who he was, but it is big enough to explain who you are and the role that you played in Scott's life. See, if he was doing his own funeral today, I imagine he would have listed all of your names, one after another, and why you mattered to him. Now, I don't know if you actually asked him that. But I imagine that you would have found out an answer from him of something that you had no idea that he even noticed, because he was intentional about his relationships with people. Even if his kids would make fun of him about staying 1 minute longer to hang out with someone. And so we're going to hear that song now.
Come stop your crying, it will be alright. Just take my hand, hold it tight. I will you from all around you. I will be here right. For I'm so small, you seem so strong. My arms will hold you, keep you safe and warm. This bond between us can't be broken. I will be here, don't you cry. 'Cause you'll be in my heart. Yes, you'll be in my heart. From this day on, now and forevermore. You'll be in my heart. Oh, what they say. You'll be here in my heart. Always. Why can't they understand the way we feel? They just don't trust what they can't explain. I know we're different, but deep inside us, we're not that different at all. And you'll be in my heart. Yes, you'll be in my heart. From this day on, now and forevermore. Don't listen to them, 'cause what do they know? We need to have to hold. They'll see in time. I know. When destiny calls you, you must be strong. I may not be with you, but you got to hold on. They'll see in time. I know. We'll show them together, 'cause you'll be in my heart. Believe me, you'll be in my heart. I'll be there from this day on, now and forevermore. Ooh, you'll be in my heart. You'll be here in my heart. I'll be with you, be here in my heart. I'll be there always. Always. I'll be with you. But I'll be there for you always. Always and always. Just look over your shoulder. Just look over your shoulder. Just look over your shoulder. I'll be there always.
You know, I was looking at the picture and just realized I, until now, didn't know what he looked like. It's a good-looking guy. Hey, kid, it's okay. I was looking for the blonde hair. So there's a line in the chorus of that song that says, "You'll be in my heart no matter what they say." And if we lived that way, my word, what the world we would live in, right? We'd have to figure out something else to put on our little news feeds every day because we live in a world that would be pretty great. But that's actually not how he lived. He said, "You'll be in my heart because of what they say." He loved people. They mattered to him. You can't possibly put a dollar amount on that. Although I'm sure there's some place somewhere that's trying to put the value of that. But if we really cataloged what he had earned in his lifetime, the capital that he had built up in the hearts of people that he spent time with talking sometimes about mundane life. And then it got really good for him because he would then talk about what life could be for people. And he knew. He knew that he could live a quiet, almost unassuming life for the most part and be more wealthy than Warren Buffett could ever be. See, he knew the only collateral you can take with you. Can't take the house, you can't take the cars. But he took his heart. One of the things I learned about him was he was not necessarily the best person with tools. Which seems an odd contrast to somebody who was inquisitive and took things apart until I asked the question, did he put them back together? And that was never part of the project. But he was good in the kitchen. Very particular about his kitchen, I understand, and where pans would go and some other things. Now, I thought for a moment they were going to start talking about the fact that he was a foodie. Didn't get there, but he had a very highbrow discernment for food. Everything was good as long as it wasn't Campbell's. I guess we all have to have our standards. This kind of earned him a title that I thought was really kind of cool. He wasn't dad. He was a domestic engineer. It's a pretty good title. But I'll tell you what, I learned this 7 years ago when the doctor handed me this screaming baby. There is nothing in the world that matters more than dad. See, a father goes out and meets the responsibilities, that little pyramid thing we learn about, food, clothing, and shelter. But a dad does something else. See, a dad leaves the workforce and stays home with his kids. A dad becomes a ref at your soccer games because, well, somebody needs to be a ref, and I'm there, and I can't sit still, and somebody's going to win, and I'm going to decide who it is, and so I'm going to ref as well. Does that sound familiar? Again, I didn't know him. A dad receives an honor that is so simple and so easy, except that it is everything in this world. And that is our daughters remembering something we said. Like, your daddy will love you forever. Think about that. I talk often in funerals about legacy. There's a lot of legacy there. And now that she's crying, I'm going to make her come up and talk a little bit. She's like, she wanted to go before her brother. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, but mostly it's because she's got something to say from the heart of a daughter to a dad.
Hello, everybody. I believe it's located in here. Thank goodness you can't read it because it's in really bad handwriting. As we all know, my brother, my dad, and I were notorious for really bad handwriting. So this is The Man is a Success adapted from Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of my favorite transcendentalists. That man is a success who had lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has garnered the respect of intelligent men and the love of his children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his task, who leaves this world better than he found it, who has never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, who looked for the best in others and gave the best he had. Thank you.
Short and sweet, sometimes the best way at a funeral. I understand some of you are thinking that about me right now, but I get paid per word, so. It was a phrase that was used more than once yesterday. When he was in, he was all in. I mean, not many of us dads would actually join the PTO and do all those things, but become the guy running it or taking over everything that he could possibly could that his kids were involved in. Except that I kind of understand that. My wife and I want to put a pool in our backyard, and everybody who isn't from here says the same thing to me. Are you crazy? It's Northern Michigan. We don't want to put a pool in our backyard. We want to provide a place where our daughter will be, that we know will be safe. See, that's part of what your dad was doing. You want to make sure you were taken care of. And by doing that for you, he got his little itch scratched too, because there were a whole bunch of other new people that he would encounter. But he wouldn't have done it for those reasons. And through that experience, you actually allowed your dad to develop a talent for something he hadn't thought about. I know he struggled for years whether he looked good in black or white, and so he took them both on. Refs wear black and white. That's how it happens. But he became good at something, not because he wanted to be good at something, but because he wanted to be great at it so that these guys would be proud of him. Think about that. Investing so much in your children that they matter, that they feel like they matter. I understand he wasn't perfect. Not all of us are, and a few of us are. He was a Spartans fan, so we have that. And we understand that from time to time, he may not have had the best sense of humor, but he had a certain special kind of dad sense of humor. I think most kids don't understand how much us dads relish in the groan that comes after a well-placed, really poorly timed joke. See, because deep down inside when that happens, there's something special that happens between dad and his kids. Because at one moment, they are completely and overwhelmingly disgusted that they have to sit and listen to that. And at the other side, they're kind of proud that their dad was willing to go out on that limb and make fun of himself quite the way he did. See, it's because dad was investing in his kids. I don't know a lot of kids who talk about their dad the way these two did. Might have even been a friend. When was the last time you thought about your relationship with your mom or your dad, or even your kids in that way? See, people mattered. Kind of got this theme going. And his kids were people to him too. Now, as I sat and listened to Elliot talk yesterday, he kept flipping between dad and Scott and dad and Scott. And clearly there was something there. I think in a way, though, it's interesting. I think for most of us guys, we want that kind of relationship with our dad where it's not dad, but we're just buds. I'd encourage you dads in the room, if you have a son like that, let him call you by your first name. Trust me, all the other weird stuff is a lot easier when he's calling you by your first name. But these people, they're people to Scott. I imagine he didn't care what they called him. Just as long as they were calling him. Now, I understand that one parent in the household may have been a little bit tougher than the other parent. If one parent was available to ask for certain things, Scott would be called upon first. I'm not suggesting that they knew he was a pushover or anything like that. But the problem with being a person who loves people is sometimes we love them so much that we let them get away with things that their mom would not let them do. And while mom might be mad at us dads for doing that, at the same time we are just overjoyed that our kids are looking at us and they're smiling and they're in the room with us. For some kids, that's all they can do to tolerate their parents. There's a lot of kids that don't even want to be in the same house with them. In large part, that's a choice. These guys wanted to be in the same room. They wanted to be in the same car. Sometimes they wanted to hang out with their friends as much as their dad did. See, they were people to him. They weren't kids. They weren't his offspring or tax deductions or any of those things. They were people he loved and he cared about. And I imagine at times it was both a joy and difficult thing to realize that, yes, he cared about them, but he also cared about everybody else too. And had very little difference, probably almost not discernible, between the way he cared and looked at his kids and the way he did everyone else. So much so that I have learned over and over again in this community are people that looked at him as a dad. Not only was he somehow cool enough to be their parents and their dad, but he opened himself up for other people. I don't know how he had the time of the day. It was said he was looked at as a father figure for people in our community. To be that kind of person, you have to be trusted. So you can't just buy that title. I'm always struck as something a little odd when I'm standing here inside this particular building. It's probably the most famous building, or certainly the most famous home in Traverse City. And if we're going to talk about the term legacy, there may be no greater definition or thing we can look to than the legacy of Perry Hanna in our community. Except, most of us don't know his children's names. Many don't know what he did or where he came from. What we learned about him was the legacy of his dollars. And I am so glad that you guys aren't filthy rich, because it would be so hard to talk about this way. Because I get to talk about him in the way that he had earned. And he didn't buy these titles. He didn't go out and buy a couple more. Hey, look what I got at the store, Mom. Look, I got 10 more people. They're great. He didn't. He might have come home with 10 people from the store, but it wasn't because he bought them. Because people mattered. Do you know how expensive that kind of life is, really? We're not just talking about taking your wallet out and helping people out, and I'm sure there have been more than one occasion where he emptied his wallet for somebody and you went, we were supposed to have dinner tonight? We're going to have Campbell's soup. But rather, he invested his time. He gave people his time. Something that is in so short supply in our world today. I know nobody in here has a cell phone, and I'm sure everybody that doesn't have one shut it off so it didn't ring, but on most of our smartphones today, we have these little red lights, these little red circles that pop up. They cause immense stress in our lives. I have 22 email addresses. I'm not kidding. And I used to sit all the time trying to get to zero. I didn't want to see that red light. And we spend a lot of time trying to get rid of everything in our lives. This past December, I had something happen in my life that kind of changed that. And I understand what is compelling him or what compelled him. I laid in a hospital bed at Munson, and a doctor told me that I was probably not going to live the night. And if I did, I was going to need a new liver. In an instant, everything in my life transformed. And I realized for the first time, I was not able to fix something. And in that, I began to realize that people don't need to be fixed, but rather people need to be cared about and loved. And so I began to understand a little bit about the life that he lived. He was incredibly wealthy when it comes to the value of people in his life. And at the same time, all those people made you incredibly poor in the things that matter to this world. I can't imagine. I mean, this didn't start like 5 or 10 years ago. This started way back in high school. I mean, he was a decent guy. And then he got better. If most of us end our lives and we lived ethical, decent lives, we'd do better than most. But the only place in his life he wasn't competitive about, from what I understand, was when it came to loving people. He didn't do it because he had to love another person. He had to love them better than his sister did, or she'd throw a chessboard at him. But rather, he had to love people. Can you get what I walked out of there with last night? I sat in my car and I called my wife, because that's what we do when we have to find out what we have to pick up from the store on the way home. And sitting in the driveway, trying not to drive into their backyard or front yard, because they live this huge hill, by the way. I don't know how you got out of the house. My wife said, "How was it?" It's an interesting thing to ask a pastor when he goes into a house of people he doesn't know, in the midst of one of the most difficult times in a family's life. A perfect stranger digging in and asking questions that you most of the time want to say, "What business is it of yours?" And I think sometimes they actually said that, but I said to my wife, "Wow." She said, "What?" I said, "There's a pretty awesome guy in this town, and I can't believe I didn't know him." And she said, "Well, maybe you didn't need the kind of help that he had." And maybe you didn't. But I think any person in here, no matter how accomplished you were, no matter how much money you had, you could always use a little bit of what he had. He spent time with people. One of those people are in the room today, and he's really dressed kind of well. It's going to make most of us look like we haven't done enough in our lives, and he's pretty young. But his sister wasn't sure that she could share these words. And so she offered up a pitch hitter as long as he would wear his uniform. And I imagine that Scott was pretty proud of him too. And so Jimmy is going to share with us his mom's heart in the words from this poem.
Hello everyone. This is the poem that my mom chose out to remind her of her brother, Scott. When I'm gone, when I come to the end of my journey and I travel my last weary mile, just forget, if you can, that I ever frowned, and remember only the smile. Forget unkind words I have spoken, remember some good I have done. Forget that I have ever had a heartache, and remember I've had loads of fun. Forget that I have stumbled and blundered, and sometimes fell by the way. Remember I have fought some hard battles, and won ere the close of the day. Then forget to grieve for my going. I would not have you sad for a day, but in summer. Just gather some flowers and remember the place where I lay, and come in the evening when the sun paints in the sky in the west. Stand for a few moments beside me and remember only my best.
Are you remembering his best today? Oh, I'm certain there were things that the family would never tell me. Doesn't matter how fantastic a person is, there's always tarnish here or there. And what I think is interesting is that's what makes us unique often. But I don't think he probably would like this very much, I have a feeling. I have a feeling he didn't mind being the center of attention under certain circumstances, but this kind of center of attention was probably something he didn't want. Now, I wasn't as perfect as he is, so I can do this all day, but there was so much about him that was just a good guy. And see, what I walked away from last night sitting with the family and hearing about these things was, among many things, was thank God that he was put in our community. That there was a man like him in our community that was loving on these people the way he was, because our community is different and it is shaped different and it looks different because of really the life and the legacy that Scott put into it. And he did that one at a time, often very quiet, hanging out with some kids, playing some soccer, running around on the field, screaming at kids, playing some soccer. But there was a little streak of him that I guess some people might call negative, some people not, and apparently he was a little competitive. Some people say competitive is not a good thing. I think it's his competitive nature which caused him to excel at so many of the things in life that excelling mattered for. You know, in the eyes of our kids, you know, if you go out and coach their little league team or if you go ref a game or something like that, you're like mega awesome in the eyes of a young child. But he went far beyond that. But it wasn't because he wanted to be a better ref than the person next to him. He found a whole nother segment of people he hadn't been able to befriend yet. Almost gave his friendship an international flair. I understand there are people all over this country that are responding on Facebook this week. There are moments in time where I do these funerals so often that I start to think of my own. And I wonder this question, what would happen when I die? Would somebody show up? Would they recognize how much I cared? Scott did. There are a lot of people in this room, some of which probably said on the way in today, "You knew Scott too?" See, he didn't make sure that you were all connected and that you all knew about each other so that you could make him feel better about the fact that he was friends with everyone. No, he just loved people where they were, when they were, how they were. And sometimes that meant going into places that he was not familiar with and not necessarily comfortable with. The surroundings where he would go to love on people didn't seem to matter, did it? We live in an interesting community where we have some affluence, and we can experience affluence pretty easily. Instead of looking all the way up at the Thunderbirds, just look at the bay and the edge, and you'll see a whole bunch of affluence. And he was familiar with it. But I imagine, based on just the reality of the stories that were shared with me, when he had the opportunity to find a place that wasn't so affluent, he often found somebody that he could love differently. See, people mattered to Scott. Think about that. You, sitting in this room today, mattered to him. There's a young man in this room who mattered a lot too. Got to call him Dad every day. Anything else? Okay.
S-C-R-O.
Thanks for spelling that one. I imagine as a dad, see, as a dad, you have a son or a daughter, and most of us understand the difference until you begin to really look at it. A daughter, my word, you come near her, and you will find out that he wasn't always the nicest guy to everyone. We will fiercely hold on to and protect our daughters. In my faith, that's because God says I'm supposed to do that. That God entrusts this perfect, precious little thing, and then she becomes a teenager, which maybe not so perfect then, but they entrust you with this beautiful little child. And they say that until she's married, you're it. Go out and be the best possible example so that when she decides to pick somebody, he looks an awful lot like you. I feel really bad for any of the guys you date. He may not be a blonde, but you think the size of the footprints in this family are large because he's not here? Imagine the size of the footprints of the young man that is going to win her heart one day because of who her dad was. But there's another relationship that we get to have as dads sometimes, and that's the one we dream about. Because frankly, any father who is dreaming about having a daughter really just hates themselves a lot, and they like that kind of stress. But if you really think about kids, you think about your son. And you think about all those things that you want to do with him, and you know what Scott probably wanted more than anything else? He wanted his son one day to call him Scott. Because he had arrived at something more than Dad. That's the things that Dad wants. Now, we're not going to tell our wives that. I don't know why he calls me it. I tell him all the time that he really shouldn't call me Scott. He shouldn't call me, it's not respectful. And as soon as he's outside with his son, you can call me Scott anytime you want. I'll tell him it's fine. And that's what we do because we want to be friends with our sons. And sometimes we want to be friends with our sons because that gives us an opportunity to speak into their lives when they become young men. There are not enough men in our community speaking out into the lives of young men the way they did in his. I was doing an inventory last night of all the things this family has to be thankful for. It's huge. It will not be until your son calls you by your first name that you will understand what it was like to be your dad. And since his sister got to do it, we're going to hear from Elliot, and he's going to share his perspective on Dad.
Wow, okay. Quite the house party we got here. Keep on thinking like ERPD is going to come in and bust it. Wow. Thank you. I would like to thank all my family, all my friends for being here today. It means so much to me, so much to all of us. And just thank you so much for keeping us in your thoughts the past few days. I would like to specifically thank the Odyssey of the Mind community, the referee community, and the Elk Rapids community for being such a big part of Scott's life and being there for us in this time of need. I'll start my little thing here, and I'm going to quote the musical Hamilton. Good stuff. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Look around look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Just think about that. That's what Scott, my dad, would want us all to do today. Compassion and selflessness. That is Scott Huggins. I will never forget the Tradition Day Fridays, nights at Applebee's, or just simply BSing after soccer games. You loved me, but also so many of my friends like your own. Reffing will never be the same. I will never forget how you mentored me and my friend Alex for so many years. I'll be honest with you, most of my memories reffing are simply long, tiring days that sucked. I mean, the check at the end was pretty nice, but no. But there was so much more to reffing with my dad than that. We shared so many laughs, so many dinners, and so much camaraderie. The referee community, many of them are here today, will not be the same with you gone. But you etched a permanent legacy into the fabric of it. In these past few days, I've done a lot of reflection, a lot of soul searching. I've just been scraping my mind for memories. And I'll be honest, my dad was not perfect. But when I'm searching my mind for memories, what is profound in my mind, and all I can think of, is love. Love for everything you did, Scott. Love for every single human being. It was never about you. It was about me or Marin, my mom or my friends, or my mom's friends, or my sister's friends, or just the community. You spent your life loving others. Like Pastor Chris said, people mattered. And to me, that is all we can ask of anyone or ourselves. I am blessed to have learned the values of compassion and love from you, and I plan to exemplify them the way you did for the rest of my life. Your loss will always be a major part of me, but I will not let it define me. And I know you didn't really like Eminem, but I think this line kind of fits. Instead of mourning your death, I'd rather celebrate your life, elevate to new heights. And that is what I must and will do with every interaction and every moment with all you beautiful people here in this brief, beautiful life. Oops. There will be times when I hear your voice echoing in my head, "God damn it!" Or I would be laying on the TV and you'd yell, "It's time for dinner time. Come on, I gotta finish South Park." I will use your voice as a precious reminder of how precious this life is, and how this brief, beautiful life that we're so lucky to have is truly only fulfilled by serving others. Scott, you are a friend to many, referee to some, mentor to others, and to me you will always be Dad. A dad who taught me how to love, have compassion, and put effort into everything I do, whether it's holding the door open for someone, saying hi, shaking someone's hand. People mattered, and that is one thing I've learned from you. I am not scared of this world without you in it, because I know you gave me all the love I need, all the tools I need to be happy and live life to the fullest. Scott, Dad, you touched so many people from so many walks of life. Your life and your legacy truly is special. Thank you for loving me endlessly, for loving my friends as your own, for driving me, for hugging me, supporting me through everything I did, like soccer and musical. I love you, and with what you've taught me, I'm ready to take this beautiful, brief life to the next level. Thank you.
We did not have a conversation ahead of time. I also didn't know he was going to have a folio with all kinds of colorful language in it. It was funny because as he said that, his mom looks right at me. I didn't teach him that, okay? That was his dad. I think it's good to laugh a little, isn't it? There's a a movie that's becoming less and less known called Steel Magnolia. In the midst of the movie, there are two really, really good friends who are fighting with each other over something really stupid. And one of them says, laughter through tears is the best emotion. I think that's a good thing to have in this time for this family. We have a guy who people mattered to, who was selfless, and had a whole bunch of really great things to say about people. People were valuable to him. Now, he may have just been like a people collector, but he was collecting the best thing. And if he didn't know you, he would go out and find you, and find a way to know you, and find the thing that you were maybe not so proud of, or ashamed of, or challenged in your life, and he looked at that thing and he started to say, this is who you are. And this is why I'm drawn to you, and other people will be drawn to you for this. And go, by the way, don't change who you are because of what people say around you. Be who you are. Now, depending on how you knew Scott, you may wonder why a pastor's up here. Clearly, he had a bunch of language to teach his son. And he would have been what we call in the church, we call them CEOs, and some of you are probably there, Christmas and Easter onlys. You come out a couple times. And we love you. We're glad to see you on those 2 days a year. But he may have been seen as that because those were the times where he went into this building that somebody built years ago called a church. And I asked the question about faith, and it's interesting when you talk about faith with people. First off, they're scared to death of what they think I'm going to say to the big guy upstairs when it comes to their faith. And you want to find out when people are Christians, be a pastor and read a Bible on an airplane. Everybody sitting around you is a Christian. But see, even my level of showing up on Sunday morning doesn't make me a Christian. And it doesn't make me a man or a person of faith. The difference is between Scott and I is I have a dedicated place I'm supposed to do it because my elders tell me to. But Scott understood the whole tenet of the Bible very simply. Do you realize that to God, people mattered? To God, he gave everything. He gave his all, 100%. The one thing he probably didn't really want to give to a bunch of people who really didn't deserve it, so that they might have life. Now, I don't know what Scott would have said about his faith, but he's living the life that Christ lived. Think about it. He gave his all to people who mattered. Something tells me that if he couldn't get through in one way, he would find another. See, that's exactly what God did for us. When we couldn't meet our obligation to him, he turned right around and found another way to do it, and he finally gave everything. He said, I'm all in for these people. On Good Friday, I said something in my message that I thought was interesting. You know, God probably doesn't really have any friends that we know about, and I can't imagine those conversations if he did, but I imagine one thing they would say to him on the day before Christ was crucified, which was, why on earth would you give that gift to those people who care so little about you? And I imagine there probably a time or two where you said to him, these people don't even know who you are, why are you giving all these things? So I don't know, maybe he knew more about faith than I did. But you mattered. People mattered. And he didn't exercise his faith going into a building all the time and sitting in a pew and waiting excitedly for the communion to be served so he could leave. He went out to do exactly what Christ told him to do, which was go into the world and love people. That's it. So, I don't know. Maybe he was a person of faith. I understand he would root for Spartan's team first, so he clearly was a person of faith. I think he understood his own human frailty. I think he understood the condition of humanity in a way that most of us don't. He understood the impact of time and value that was given to people. I was struck by something yesterday, and I didn't say it when I went into the house. Now, I've been into a number of homes in Windmill Farm. We almost became neighbors, actually. But I didn't want that ridiculous driveway, but that's another story. See, a lot of us have homes that are full of stuff. And it might have been because you have those two enormous dogs in there, but you know, there's not much stuff in their house. And I don't say it as a criticism. I almost thought, like, is this a rental? Like, you just move in? I mean, it's sparse of stuff. Because guess what? Stuff doesn't matter. But there were a heck of a lot of people in there last night. Yeah. We had your sister and I had a conversation a few hours earlier in the midst of the worst snowstorm that has ever hit northern Michigan in the last 5 days. But that, you know, I'm waiting for the big snowstorm to come. But we had a conversation, I don't even know what it was, noon or something. And a few hours later, 25 people in the midst of this thing show up, walk or drive up that ridiculous driveway and sit in a room with a stranger for an hour to tell this stranger the awesome things that this man has done in their lives. That is the value and the dividend that comes from putting people first in your life. They were also as happy to see me leave because they went on the Olive Garden, which I didn't get invited to, but that's another story. I'm just saying. His sister had a different relationship with him, probably than most. He may not have been as perfect to her and growing up as he was to most of us. On a side note, I mean, come on. A guy with the last name Huggins? How could you not love a guy like this? But his sister reminded me that he wasn't perfect. He was competitive at times. But in thinking about it, I think it wasn't so much competitive as it was making us better around him. He really wanted to make sure that she could throw a chessboard when she needed to. He didn't like losing. But often when somebody around us pushes us like that, we become better for it. I don't think he watered down the game very often to make you feel better about your winning or losing. He was so competitive that at times he wouldn't even play.
This past Easter, he wouldn't play euchre. I'd get too angry.
I wouldn't play euchre either, but that's a different story entirely. I'm not from Michigan, so I still don't even know what the game is. See, he understood that you don't break things down and make people feel like they won. And so since he was going to obliterate you at every chance he had, he just didn't put you through that torture. See, he liked people. He liked people. So here's the catch now. See, I guess I'm supposed to say something eloquent and important that you walk out of here and when you pick up the phone, you say, oh, that pastor, he just said something that was so moving. You know what? I don't know what to tell you except two things. If I ever in my life believed there was a God who gave compassionately everything he had, I believe it and seeing it in the life and the legacy of your husband and your son and your brother, your dad. You don't get that way accidentally. We are selfish human beings by nature. If you don't believe me, go to a kindergarten classroom or to a nursery and put one toy in the room and watch what happens. We, by nature, think about ourselves first at every pass. And then this weird guy shows up in your life in high school, and all of a sudden he's like, wait a second, he's doing cool things for other people. He's not a high school kid. Now, I asked Naomi what it was that she liked about him. She wouldn't tell me. I'm still waiting to find out what it is. but he was different. He stood out even then. I imagine the shadow behind him sometimes was pretty big. And he didn't know it. I hope he knew how you cared about him. The thing about the love languages we talked about earlier is we speak to people in our love language, and we feel love when people speak to us in ours. And basically what he was saying was, I'm going to serve you because I love you. Hey, do something for me once in a while. Like call me Scott. Play soccer so I can become a ref. See, he spent and spent and spent when it came to the things that mattered to him. And we're people. He didn't become this way accidentally. It's the whole nature and nurture thing put together. But what we can take from this is a challenge to us. If you spent the rest of your life trying to treat one human being the way he treated every stranger he came in contact with, if you just spent that, if you just did that in our community, it would look a lot different. Maybe that's what we need to take away. One of the words that, maybe it was 2 words, that were given at the first part of the night was open-minded. Now, as a pastor, I don't know that my profession is necessarily labeled with that term at the top of the list. And that's a marketing problem more than anything else, because for most of us, we are pretty open-minded and we love people for who they are. But his open-mindedness allowed him to experience the fullness of God in a way that few of us will ever have. And he opened his mind and his heart and his home and his time and his wallet and everything he could open up for people. See, when you're open-minded, what people are saying is that you treated people well. I imagine some of the people he was open-minded with he didn't agree with, but he treated them well. We talked about that word hospitality earlier. He was hospitable to people. He didn't care if he was right, unless he won. He cared that he treated people well. We're going to hear one more song as we close today. And it really is that. Live life well and treat people well. I'm starting to feel a little old now because this song has been on Broadway, off Broadway, traveled around the country a couple of times. But there was a really hip, modern musical, and since he sang it, I'm going to sing. I'm not, I promise. Way hipper than Hamilton ever was. And it told the story about some people who, through either choice or whatever, ended up in situations. And guess what? The people around them didn't care. And they felt alone, because when people around you don't care or treat you that way, you feel alone. Problem was they didn't know Scott. Had he spent a little time in New York, they couldn't have written this musical. The song was Seasons of Love, and the musical is called Rent. There were some pretty non-open-minded people when this came out that didn't even want to see it, to hear what the reality is. Life is messy, and God puts people in your lives to love and to care about. So when somebody asks in the future if your husband was a man of faith, there is no question that he was. No question. Just listen to the words of this song.
525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments, oh dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter and strife. In 525,600 minutes, how do you measure a year in the life? How about love? How about love? How about love? Measuring love. Seasons of love. Seasons of love.
525,600 minutes, 525,000 journeys to plan, 525,600 minutes. How do you measure the life of a woman or a man?
In truths that she learned, or in times that he cried, in bridges he burned, or the way that she died.
It's time now to sing out, though the story never ends.
Let's celebrate, remember a year in the life of friends. Remember love.
You got to remember the love. You know that love is a gift from up above. Share love, give love, spread love. Measure your life in love.
Seasons of love. Seasons of
Measure your life in love.
There's going to be a day in all of our lives where we're going to breathe for the last time. For most of us, we think it's a long way down. And so we're preparing for a day when we have to start working for that day. I don't think Scott thought that this April would be the last April he had. And maybe it became natural to him, and so maybe he was a little bit lucky that it just became natural that he counted people as valued. But he lived his life every day the way that song said. It comes down to one thing. What is important to you? We all in this room, and myself now included, have had the privilege to bump up against this guy for a period of time. For a lot of people, he's a massive example that they can never feel like they can attain. For some people, they'll be happy they never have to have a chessboard thrown at them. But there's a guy that for a brief period of time walked around in your lives and interacted with you in a way that meant you were valuable to him. See, those people we keep talking about, they're in this room. It's not fiction. You're a bunch of messed up, misfit people that he likes, apparently. And that's great, because it was in that character, the things that make us different, that he found important to people. It really comes down to one simple thing. Leave here today knowing that you mattered to him. He loved you. Jeez, if that's all he did. I want to thank you on behalf of Naomi and her children and the family for being here. I think the truth of the reality and the magnitude of this day is just going to start hitting the family. They've been pretty good at not crying so far. But they're going to need you as the days and the weeks go ahead and they start to realize what's not there. And the kids realize that mom planned this trip and there's a lot of things missing from it. I did notice a Campbell's soup in the can, in the picture, by the way. Or maybe it was Chef Boyardee. I think it's Campbell's soup, just because it's funnier that way. They're going to need your love and your support. And it's real simple. Because I get this all the time. Well, what do I do? It's real simple. What would have Scott done for you? Now, I can give you the Bible, and I can show you where God tells us to do A, B, C, D, and E, and that's great, and those are wonderful things. But do you know what they told him to do? Exactly what Scott did. Figure out how to love on them for the weirdness that is within their family, the things that change them, that make them separate and unique and special, and walk up to them and say, you know what, I love you and I care about you, and I'll do whatever you want. Now, there is a challenge in that. We're all going to say something probably in the next few days, which is, if there's anything I can do, let me know. We all say it. Almost 3 years ago, I made that call to a friend of mine who lost her husband. I now became the pastor of the church I'm at because I made that phone call. Be careful what you say to somebody. But here's the thing. I've been in ministry a long time and I've been serving a long time, and there has been no greater privilege in my life than to serve as a pastor. To sit next to somebody when they're dying. I get to go to cool things too, like weddings. But I have never been more privileged, to be able to learn about somebody in death, to be able to see their life and the things that matter, and all the ugly stuff that we know. That seems to, nobody ever tells me the bad stuff. So I get to see the God stuff in people. Look for that this week. And your coworkers in the cubicle next to you or wherever you're at, go out and find that. And when you can't find it, pick up the phone and call one of these people here and say, your husband loved me, so I owe you. And Naomi, start collecting. He loved you. He loved you. It's evident. And so on behalf of their family, and sitting through an hour, mostly of me, I can't tell you the privilege it's been to get to know who Scott is. I found myself very, very fortunate to have done that. And so you're going to leave here now, and you're going to eat some great food. Do you have a lot of food? Did you bring it all to the house over the last week?
Yes.
Especially Godfrey, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Pizza.
Godfrey came through.
Yes, Godfrey, thank you.
Food is one of the greatest ways that we can fellowship with each other and laugh. And so this afternoon, as you go off to spend some time with the family, I'm going to encourage you to do something. Try to outdo each other with love and affection. It's a tenet of Scripture. And that is what literally Scott woke up doing every morning. He woke up and said, I did pretty good yesterday, but today's a new day. And so God spoke through the Apostle Paul, and he said, outdo each other with love and affection. Not a bad day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you again, everybody, for coming today. Pastor for Chris Cox, thank you. I'm so glad that we do not pay him by the word, for sure. Again, there is that luncheon out in Elk Rapids, so please feel free to join the family out there. Maps at the door if you should need them. Thank you.